On this channel, we've talked a lot about the Italian mafia, drug cartels, and other criminal groups. Once in prison, the boss of any of these criminal structures loses, if not all, then most of their power. The subjects of our story today are the complete opposite. They are held in the most secure facilities, yet they manage to run a criminal organization that has power and influence both inside and outside the prison. Outside, they produce and sell drugs, supply Mexican cartels with weapons, and have their own bank. But their leadership and power are on the inside. It's from here, with the help of encrypted letters, invisible ink, and bribed guards, that they coordinate contract killings and multi-million-dollar deals across America and beyond. They're probably one of the most successful examples of the phenomenon known as prison gangs. And if you're interested in learning more, then meet the Aryan Brotherhood on the other side of the law. It was the late 1960s. California's maximum security prison, San Quentin, was like a boiling cauldron of violence and racial hatred. The inmates here spontaneously divided along racial lines. Black inmates united under the banner of the Black Guerrilla family, whose ideology was closely intertwined with radical movements such as the Black Panthers and the Nation of Islam. Spanish-speaking prisoners formed the Mexican mafia, La M. These groups dominated the prison, controlling its corridors and the flow of contraband. White inmates who were in the minority and constantly under attack had no choice but to band together for self-defense. This is how the Diamond Tooth Gang came into being. To instill fear in their opponents, its members glued shards of broken glass to their teeth. When they smiled, the sunlight played on these improvised diamonds, creating an eerie image. Despite the unusualness of this action, the intimidation effect worked well, and the gang made itself known quite loudly. Later, for reasons lost in prison folklore, the gang changed its name to the Blue Bird Gang. But very quickly, the gang felt the need for ideological fervor, not just vivid imagery. And they took a well-known ideology that is widely represented throughout the globe and banned in virtually the entire civilized world. The Aryan Brotherhood was born, openly proclaiming the superiority of the white race and undivided loyalty to its own. The Brotherhood's motto became blood in, blood out. This meant that the potential candidate for membership in the Brotherhood had to kill a person, which was called making his bones. It's important to emphasize that this was not simply a matter of participating in a bloody brawl or some kind of random attack. Making bones meant committing a ritualistic murder. In this context, murder was imbued with a very deep meaning, the right of a white warrior to break any law for the sake of his own greatness. The procedure was initially quite strictly regulated. Of course, there was no written document, but the law was well known to everyone. The candidate had to shed blood in hand-to-hand combat. It was desirable to choose an enemy as the target. The more serious the opponent, the better. The coolest target to hit was a prison officer. The choice of victim was of strategic importance. Killing a prisoner from a hostile clan strengthened the Brotherhood's position in the race wars. Attacking a guard meant declaring war on the prison system itself, a statement that the Brotherhood did not recognize its authority and rules. The ritual served several key functions. First, it served as an effective filter, weeding out the weak. Those who were not prepared to kill could not be admitted into the ranks of an organization whose existence was based on violence. Second, it created an unbreakable bond between the new member and the Brotherhood. By committing murder, a person became bound to the organization by a common crime. Third, it sent a powerful message to the entire prison. The news that another candidate had made the cut spread instantly among the inmates, reinforcing the Brotherhood's authority. After taking the oath, the new recruit underwent a painful ritual that the prisoners themselves called branding. A tattoo was applied to his skin, a sign of belonging that he would carry for the rest of his life. Most often, these were the letters AB, the number 666, the mark of the beast from the Book of Revelation, or a green shamrock. The symbolism of the shamrock, which has its roots in ancient Persia, meant for the Brotherhood a connection between heaven, man, and earth, where the white warrior acted as a mediator between the divine and the earthly. It was a sign of being chosen and of eternal struggle for one's truth. The Oath of Brotherhood itself, which every new member memorized, resembled the vows of fanatical suicide bombers. It goes like this: An Aryan brother is without a care. He walks where the weak and heartless won't dare. And if by chance he should stumble and lose control, his brothers will be there to help reach his goal. For a worthy brother, no need is too great. He need not but ask, fulfillment's in his fate. For an Aryan brother, death holds no fear. Vengeance will be his, through his brothers still here. The poetry of death and absolute loyalty likened the Brotherhood not to street gangs, but to religious cults and ideologically charged fighters such as the Japanese kamikaze. Initially, direct democracy prevailed in the Brotherhood, meaning each member had a vote in decision-making. However, as the organization spread like a cancerous tumor throughout California's prisons and then across the country, this system lost its effectiveness. The leaders came to the conclusion that a full-fledged structural hierarchy was needed. Thus, the Commission was created. In the organization's golden years, it was a triumvirate of Barry the Baron Mills, Tyler the Hulk Bingham, and Thomas Terrible Tom Silverstein, who became for the Brotherhood a kind of blasphemous parody of the Holy Trinity that ruled the entire organization. However, they were not ideological fighters for white supremacy, as you might think. This trio were pragmatic sociopaths who saw the gang as a tool for gaining power in the chaotic prison world. Ideology was just a tool for them to control the rank and file. Let's talk a little bit about the leaders. Mills grew up in a dreary atmosphere in a small California town. Boredom and a sense of his own insignificance pushed him into crime, largely not for profit, but for the intoxicating feeling of adrenaline. His first crimes, such as car theft, were more like childish pranks and moments of defiance against a system that offered him nothing but a dead end. However, the prison sentence, which was supposed to be a punishment, unexpectedly opened the door to a new world for Mills, one that brought meaning to his life. He was sent to San Quentin, and it was there that he encountered the Aryan Brotherhood, finding in it an organization that became his social ladder. He went through initiation and very quickly rose to leadership. The second person from the commission is Tyler the Hulk Bingham. Before prison, Bingham was a gym manager in Sacramento and had a degree in art. The turning point came when he stumbled upon a magazine article about a New York mobster. He was struck by the mobster's lifestyle: power, money, permissiveness, and an aura of invincibility. Inspired, Bingham began robbing banks and then ended up in prison, where he joined the Aryan Brotherhood. Like Mills, he was not an ideological racist, but used the Brotherhood as a tool to gain power. This is probably what brought them together when they met in an Atlanta prison, where they were both transferred at the same time. The third leader, Thomas Silverstein, known by the nickname Terrible Tom, went down in history as one of the most violent prisoners in the United States. His childhood in Long Beach, California, was difficult. His parents constantly fought, his peers teased and beat him, and his mother, instead of supporting him, humiliated him, calling him a crybaby. The turning point came at a California reform school, which he called Gladiator School. Here, you either had to fight or risk being beaten to death. This is how Tom became completely embittered towards the whole world. Years later, already a prisoner at San Quentin, he joined the Aryan Brotherhood, where he found what he had been deprived of since childhood: a sense of belonging, respect, and protection. Silverstein earned his nickname Terrible Tom for the ruthlessness for which he used violence. For example, while running a heroin smuggling operation in Leavenworth Prison, Tom asked one inmate to work as a drug courier. The inmate refused, for which he was personally stabbed to death by Silverstein. On another occasion, already in the Marion prison, he used a piece of wire to strangle Robert Chappelle, a member of the rival DC Blacks gang, right in his cell. Then, together with another member of the Aryan Brotherhood, he stabbed one of the leaders of the DC Blacks, Raymond Cadillac Smith, 67 times. But the point of no return came with the murder of a guard, Merle Klutz, in 1983. Tom, with the help of his accomplices, managed to remove his handcuffs and attack the guard who had previously confiscated his belongings. Later, Tom described the sensation of stabbing with painful pride, comparing himself to the angel of death. The attack was apparently not spontaneous. The key to the handcuffs had been stolen in advance, and a knife had been prepared, which was handed to Tom immediately before the attack. For his antics since 1987, Thomas Silverstein was placed in a special cell in Leavenworth Prison, infamous as the Hannibal Room. It was a cage inside an empty wing. where he spent the next 15 years in complete isolation under round-the-clock surveillance. His only activities were watching television and drawing, in which, ironically, he discovered a great talent. This man became the face of the gang, although he did not make as many significant changes to its structure as the other two leaders. It was these three men who led the Aryan Brotherhood during its golden age. They declared war on other gangs, authorized murders, determined who would engage in drug trafficking, extortion, and other means of earning money, and decided which outside criminal groups to cooperate with. Directly under the Commission was the next level of the hierarchy, the councils. The Commission was the supreme board of directors of the entire criminal corporation. The councils performed the functions of regional management. Each state prison system had its own council, consisting of high-ranking members of the Aryan Brotherhood. These councils managed day-to-day operations, collected taxes, distributed drugs, and carried out the Commission's orders locally. This system made the Aryan Brotherhood a flexible and resilient organization. The arrest or isolation of members of one council had virtually no impact on the organization's activities in another state. Each council acted as an autonomous but integral part of a single body. At the head of each individual prison was the senior brother, the shot caller. He was the supreme leader, the link between the council or commission command and life inside a particular facility. He was the one who received encrypted orders and carried them out, and he was also responsible for key decisions within the prison, such as declaring wars, authorizing murders, and distributing drugs and finances. The leader's right-hand man was the captain. If the senior brother was a strategist, the captain was a tactician, responsible for internal discipline and the physical execution of sentences. His duties also included conducting initiation ceremonies when a newcomer had to commit murder, as well as personally leading punitive actions. The councilman was responsible for the day-to-day management of resources and negotiations. He acted as a diplomat in conflicts with other groups and as a financier, controlling the collection and laundering of funds. Often, he was also an expert in encryption and secure communication channels. The foundation of the organization's power was the soldiers, full members who had undergone a bloody baptism and were marked with a tattoo. They served as the main force in prison territories, ensuring the physical presence of the Brotherhood. They were responsible for distributing drugs and gathering information, and on command, they turned into a cohesive fighting unit. At the lowest level of the hierarchy were the prospects, peckerwoods. They did the dirtiest work. Their status was temporary and unstable. They were under the conditional protection of the Brotherhood, but could be sacrificed at any moment. Outside the main structure were associates, external smugglers and mercenaries who worked with the Brotherhood but were not members. Despite the fact that the Aryan Brotherhood is primarily a prison gang, it also needs money to exist. The first way it obtains money is by selling protection. When gang leaders were locked up, their usual protection disappeared if they found themselves in a prison where there were no other members of their gang. This is where the Brotherhood came in, offering protection or other forceful assistance in exchange for money or services. For example, John Gotti, while serving a sentence, asked the Brotherhood to kill the man who had beaten him up. The second way is drug trafficking in prisons. Let's discuss it using the example of the network of Thomas Silverstein and John Marsloff. Drugs were delivered to the prison by the girlfriends or wives of the gang members, who carried the drugs in a condom hidden in their mouths. During the visit, the girl would kiss her man and pass the condom into his mouth. He would swallow it so that the goods would not be found during a subsequent search. If all went well, the condom would naturally come out and the goods would end up in the prison. The local dealers, such as John Marsloff, would get involved. He would receive the drugs, divide them into small bags, and sell them. The markup percentage from the purchase price or production cost could reach into the thousands. This trick, which turned a nominal 10 cents into hundreds of dollars, was made possible by a complex external network. The buyer would contact someone on the outside, usually a relative, who would then transfer the money to a trusted person working for Marsloff. The money was either handed over in cash or deposited into an account at a local bank. When Tom needed his money, he sent members of an associate gang on the outside, bikers from the Nazi lowriders, to pick it up in cash. It was at this stage that Marsloff, tempted by the ease with which huge sums of money were circulating, made a fatal mistake. He decided that his labor and risk were worth not 20, but 30%, and began to withhold part of the money. But in an empire built on fear and total control, such an independent financial decision was tantamount to a death sentence. Tom sent a letter to Baron Mills, ordering him to take care of business. Mills, along with another member of the Brotherhood, stabbed Marslov to death on a prison toilet, practically cutting off his head. It was a clear and unambiguous signal to everyone. There was no room for arbitrariness in the financial empire of the Aryan Brotherhood. Every cent had to reach its destination, and any betrayal was immediately punished. For a long time, the general public and even law enforcement agencies had a simplified view of the Aryan Brotherhood as a fanatical racist organization whose ideology of white supremacy was uncompromising and unshakable. However, the reality turned out to be more complex and cynical. The most striking example of this was the strategic alliance between the Aryan Brotherhood and the Mexican mafia, La M. The key figure who served as a bridge between these gangs was Rafael González Munoz. This man was one of the leaders of La M, connected to drug dealers from Mexico. He started with marijuana, then, following the demand of the drug market, switched first to cocaine and then to methamphetamine. His drug network spread across Southern California, Arizona, and Texas until the Drug Enforcement Administration raided one of his warehouses along with González Munoz himself. He ended up getting 30 years in prison and was sent to USP Beaumont. It was there that he got to know the Aryan Brotherhood better, appreciated their organizational structure, and decided to try to form a business alliance with them. The Brotherhood's rhetoric was certainly steeped in racism, but by that point, their philosophy had undergone a significant evolution. The idea of white supremacy had gradually transformed into the idea of undivided gang power. Supremacy came to be understood not in a narrow racial sense, but in an absolute sense. They sought to be at the top of the food chain, and if that meant hitching their rotten horse to the Mexican gang's wagon, as their ideological ancestors might have said, then they were willing to take that step. As a sign of respect, or perhaps hidden contempt, the Brotherhood gave González Munoz the nickname Cisco. This was a reference to an old Western movie in which Cisco was the character Pancho's sidekick, and the nickname was not given in honor of the boss of the pair. The nickname eloquently demonstrated the true state of affairs. Even in this pragmatic alliance, hierarchy and a hint of racial arrogance remained. For the Brotherhood, González Munoz was a useful partner, but not an equal. Cisco seemed to be fine with that. He was interested in real power, not a place in the symbolic pantheon. This alliance changed the landscape of organized crime in American prisons. It proved that behind bars, where survival of the ultimate goal, any ideology, even the most toxic, can be discarded for the common good. The Mexican mafia, with its extensive external connections, but not always total control within specific penitentiary institutions, needed enforcers. The Aryan Brotherhood, whose members were scattered throughout prisons across the country and whose internal discipline was unquestionable, was ideal for the role of such an enforcer. The Brotherhood controlled the distribution of drugs within prisons, collected debts from users and dealers, and eliminated any hint of competition. If any independent dealer or small gang tried to challenge their monopoly, they were destroyed. In return, La M supplied drugs to prisons. A reasonable question arises from this. How is such a compromise of conscience perceived by the base members of the Brotherhood, many of whom joined the organization precisely under the banner of racial hatred? The answer lies within the nature of totalitarian groups. Ideology is a powerful tool for recruitment and cohesion. But when leadership is faced with a choice between dogma and profit, dogma invariably takes a back seat. The top leadership of the Aryan Brotherhood conveyed a simple idea to the lower ranks. This union is not about friendship, but about business and power. It was a strategic move that strengthened their position against common enemies, primarily the growing power of black groups. Those who were dissatisfied either remained silent or quickly became targets for assassination by their own comrades. The organization demonstrated that its true hierarchy was based not on racial purity, but on personal loyalty, obedience, and a willingness to kill on command. The nickname Cisco for González Munoz was not a joke. It was a signal to the Aryan brothers. He's useful to us, but he's not one of us. He is a tool. The ADX Florence Maximum Security Prison in Colorado was designed as a place that was impossible to escape from and impossible to run a criminal organization from. Inmates are held in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day, and their contact with the outside world is minimized and carefully monitored. But the Brotherhood leaders who were sent there found ways to circumvent the restrictions and continue to run the gang. The basis of this system was a simple but effective chain of command. Orders from leaders locked up in the Supermax ADX facilities reached influential members of the Brotherhood in other prisons, who in turn passed on instructions to rank-and-file members. The problem was breaking through the information blockade. Direct orders to kill someone, intercepted by the prison administration, would not only disrupt specific actions but also become evidence for new indictments. The solution was found in a combination of ancient methods of espionage and prison ingenuity. A striking example is the letter that Barry Mills sent to Al "Skinny" Benton at USP Lewisburg in 1997, ordering him to wage war against the DC Blacks gang. On the surface, it was a normal, even boring message. Mills wrote about family news and the books he was reading, and even mentioned his new hobby, crocheting, which helped him fight boredom. He advised Skinny to try it too. The entire text was filled with similar verbal garbage. Federal supervisors who were required to open, read, and copy every letter sent to and from ADX Florence saw nothing suspicious in it. However, the second part of this letter, containing the combat mission, was written by Mills in urine-based ink. As it dried, the liquid became invisible to the naked eye. The feds had no idea it existed. But even if by some miracle they had delivered the hidden text, a new obstacle awaited them. Mills wrote the text using Bacon's cipher, invented in the 17th century by philosopher Francis Bacon. This method uses two different alphabets, representing each letter of the original message with a combination of symbols from two sets. In essence, it was a code within a code, a puzzle that could not be cracked without a key. The key to the cipher was carefully memorized by all responsible members of the Aryan Brotherhood. Upon receiving the letter, the addressee, for example, Skinny Benton, carefully heated it over a flame. The heat revealed invisible text written in urine-based ink. Then, using the memorized key, the person deciphered the order. After reading, the letter was destroyed, and then there was no material evidence, only a verbal order passed on to the executioners in the prison yard. But what if an urgent message needed to be conveyed? For such cases, the Brotherhood had a well-organized courier service consisting of lawyers and other visitors. Attorney-client privilege made communication between a prisoner and his lawyer confidential and beyond the control of the prison administration, which the Brotherhood took advantage of. A lawyer representing the Brotherhood would come to a meeting and, under the guise of discussing the details of the case, would pass on verbal instructions or even coded notes hidden, for instance, in a pack of cigarettes. The visitor system worked in a similar way. The wives, girlfriends, and relatives of gang members were used as couriers. The most valuable but also the most risky agents in this network were bribed guards. A bribed guard could bring in anything, ignore a violation, warn of an impending search, or pass on a message bypassing all official channels. However, working with them required the utmost caution. The exposure of such an employee could lead to a high-profile scandal, criminal cases, and a potential weakening of the gang's position. However, this sophisticated communication system would hardly have worked so well if it weren't for the iron discipline of the Brotherhood members, enforced through violence. Every member of this gang, from the top to the bottom, knew that betrayal or insubordination would be severely punished. When Barry Mills, sitting in his cell at ADX Florence, wrote the encrypted order to kill in invisible ink, he had no doubt that it would be carried out. The person who received this order could not ignore it, discuss it, or complain about it. Failure to carry out the order was tantamount to suicide. Anyone who hesitated or asked unnecessary questions was automatically declared a weak link and subject to elimination. After all, they could become a potential traitor. The fear of being killed by one of their own was a powerful motivator, forcing them to carry out orders clearly and unquestioningly. Those who decided to betray the Brotherhood and start testifying were persecuted both in prison and on the outside. Killing rats was one of the top priorities in order to maintain the organization's authority. Lewisburg Federal Prison, August 1997. Skinny Benton, a high-ranking member of the Aryan Brotherhood receives a message. It was sent by the Brotherhood's leader, Barry Mills, who was imprisoned at ADX Florence in Colorado in a secret letter. He orders Benton to organize an attack on the rival gang, the DC Blacks. After receiving and deciphering the order, Skinny Benton gathers the Brotherhood in the prison yard and gives out the orders. The attack will take place in 2 days at 2 p.m. All participants will be divided into groups and assigned their targets. Some will strike in the yard, some in the showers, and some in the cells. August 28, 1997 arrives. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Lewisburg Prison witnesses an attack by the Aryan Brotherhood, which researchers call controlled chaos. From the outside, it just looks like chaotic clashes between rival gangs, but it's actually based on careful planning. In the showers, 4 members of the DC Blacks were washing and laughing, feeling at ease. Their weapons were laying with their clothes a few yards away. A fatal mistake based on the confidence that no one would dare attack 4 tough guys. Their confidence evaporated when 8 members of the Brotherhood, armed with knives, entered. 3 minutes later, it was all over. 4 black prisoners lay motionless on the tiled floor in a pool of their own blood. Meanwhile, another execution was taking place in the corner of the prison yard. Skinny Benton personally took care of Abdul Salam, one of the leaders of the DC Blacks. Benton stabbed his fallen opponent repeatedly with a sharpened knife until the count exceeded 30. Inside the prison building, the third scene of this bloody spectacle unfolded. DC Blacks member Frank Joyner lay on his bunk in a cell, bleeding to death. The 2 members of the Brotherhood who had stabbed him dozens of times covered him with a blanket and calmly walked away, discussing baseball news. This casual chat against the backdrop of the atrocity they had just committed was perhaps the most chilling manifestation of their alienation. For them, murder was routine, a task that should not interfere with their normal interests in life. According to the medical examiner report, Frank Joyner died from 34 stab wounds. Abdul Salam died from 35. The 4 victims in the shower miraculously survived. This was one of many violent actions carried out by the Brotherhood in prisons across America. Precise, brutal strikes, synchronized in time, sent a clear message to the entire prison population and administration. We can reach anyone, anytime, anywhere, even from the most secure prison in the country. We can dictate our will. The fear generated by such actions was the Brotherhood's main asset. It intimidated potential opponents and ensured that business, drug trafficking, racketeering, and contract killings would continue uninterrupted. The Aryan Brotherhood had everything perfectly organized within the prison walls, but in order to function fully, they needed people on the outside, which is where the Nazi lowriders biker gang came in. They were a hybrid of ultra-right-wing neo-Nazi ideology and street gang culture. These guys shared with the Brotherhood not only racial hatred, but also a deep contempt for the law and a thirst for power based on violence. The symbiosis proved to be mutually beneficial. For the Aryan Brotherhood, whose members were locked up in concrete boxes of high-security prisons, the Nazi lowriders became the external manifestation of their will. They were couriers, debt collectors, executioners, and the main channel for money laundering. The bikers were ideal for this role. Their motorcycles allowed them to move quickly, their group was strictly hierarchical and disciplined, and their appearance discouraged unnecessary questions. The key function of the Nazi lowriders was to collect money. As we've already mentioned, they collected funds from the sale of drugs inside the prisons, which went to special people. 80% of the funds collected went directly to the Brotherhood's commissioners. They were used to finance criminal activities both inside and outside the prison system. The remaining 20% was divided among the participants in the scheme on the outside, primarily among the Nazi lowriders. This strategic alliance brought the Aryan Brotherhood out from behind bars. The Brotherhood was no longer tied to a specific prison or even the US federal prison system. Prison went from being a place of exclusion from society to a headquarters, an impregnable fortress from which the high command ruled an empire that stretched far beyond the barbed wire. The Nazi lowriders and similar groups became the tentacles that allowed the octopus to entangle not only the prison world with its influence, but also the world at large. Earlier, we mentioned that the Brotherhood had an alliance with La M, which helped establish a continuous supply of drugs. However, it should be noted that the Aryan Brotherhood also had its own protection of illegal substances. Their system in this business was based on three key elements: selecting strategic locations, professional staffing, and specialized industrial equipment. One of the key factors in their success was the decision to locate their production facilities not in traditionally crime-ridden or remote rural areas, but in prosperous suburban areas. This tactic, later dubbed concealment in plain sight, was implemented in the city of Pleasanton, California. According to ratings at that time, Pleasanton was regularly recognized as one of the wealthiest and safest medium-sized cities in the United States. This status provided natural protection from suspicion by law enforcement agencies, whose attention was traditionally focused on less affluent areas. 2 warehouses were rented in the Pleasanton Industrial Park, and signs with the name Hyperchem Industries were installed. This name, sounding technological and scientific, fit perfectly into the landscape of the industrial park, and did not raise any questions from local authorities and residents. This disguise as a legitimate chemical company allowed for the unhindered logistics operations, the regular delivery of large volumes of chemicals, and the removal of finished products did not attract unnecessary attention. No one could have imagined that behind the walls of these unremarkable warehouses, a round-the-clock production of crystal meth was taking place. The chief cook was chemist Arturo Colano, a graduate of the California Institute of Technology, with a degree in chemical engineering. He was the architect of the entire technological process, responsible for its optimization, safety, and final product quality. Technical personnel for the laboratories were also recruited from among educated professionals. The core team consisted of former IT specialists, engineers, and other white-collar workers who, after the burst of the dot-com bubble in the early 2000s, lost their high-paying jobs and were forced to work in low-paying positions. These people were highly intelligent, quick learners, and skilled at working with complex technology. This enabled the Brotherhood to ensure a continuous flow of high-quality ice in large quantities. They cooked it using the Nazi method. This technique was developed and widely used in Germany during World War II to supply the Wehrmacht troops with the stimulative Pervitin. The Nazi method was based on the reductive amination of phenylacetone using metallic lithium in liquid ammonia. The Brotherhood needed several key chemicals for cooking, for which they built an entire system. The first was pseudoephedrine. Although the Nazi method could do without pseudoephedrine, its use made it possible to obtain a purer and more potent product. The main purchases of this precursor, measured in tons, were made through frontmen in Hong Kong and the Czech Republic, where its production and export had long been poorly regulated. The smuggling was carried out by sea through the major ports of America's West Coast, Oakland and Long Beach. A critical element of success here was the corrupt relationship with the dockworkers' unions. For a corresponding fee, union officials ensured that containers were lost in the documentation and could be removed from the port dump without hindrance. The second was anhydrous ammonia. It's used in agriculture as a nitrogen fertilizer, but buying it legally was dangerous, as large volumes would immediately arouse suspicion. Therefore, a scheme was developed. The Brotherhood negotiated with farmers who bought more ammonia than they needed. They then left it at a prearranged location, and members of the Nazi lowriders took the chemical away. The farmers then reported the so-called theft and received insurance payments. In this way, they made a double profit, from selling the chemical to the syndicate and from the insurance company. The third was lithium, which was extracted from old car batteries purchased at salvage yards across the country. By offering clearly inflated prices, the Brotherhood effectively monopolized this market. This scheme was ingenious in its simplicity. It did not violate the laws on purchasing chemicals and ensured a constant supply of the necessary substances. Other chemicals that could be purchased legally were bought for cash from chemical distributors. When offered large sums of cash, many sellers forgot to fill out the paperwork. Thus, the purchase of hundreds of thousands of pounds of potassium, for example, with cash payment made the purchase virtually anonymous. So we're all stocked up on chemicals. Now let's move on to production. The 2 Hyperchem Industries labs operated in a continuously flowing production mode, similar to a conveyor belt in a factory. The work was organized on a shift schedule 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The technical staff, trained under the guidance of Arturo Calano, was divided into shifts. Each shift was responsible for a specific stage of the process: preparation of raw materials, initiation of the reaction, filtration, and initial purification of the product. This approach allowed for the most efficient use of expensive equipment and facilities, minimizing downtime. The production cycle was calculated down to the minute, ensuring a consistent and predictable yield of finished methamphetamine. Each batch produced was subject to mandatory chemical analysis. The internal testing protocol developed by Colano was designed to determine the percentage of pure D-methamphetamine and identify dangerous byproducts of its synthesis. Only after the laboratory gave the go-ahead was the batch considered ready for further operations. This approach allowed them to create something similar to a brand on the black market. Dealers and end users did not need to worry. They knew that Hyperchem products were of the highest quality. This reputation allowed the syndicate to dictate prices and generate steady demand. After cooking and quality control, it was time to sell. The finished and packaged product left the Hyperchem Industries warehouses and went to distributors like the Nazi lowriders. They used motorcycles to transport large batches of drugs to regional warehouses in different parts of the West Coast. From there, smaller batches were distributed to retailers. The entire process was as anonymous as possible. NLR couriers did not contact dealers, and dealers did not contact manufacturers. Caches, code signals, and disposable phones were used. This structure ensured the security of the entire operation. If someone from the lower ranks was arrested, the investigation could not trace the leadership and production facilities. However, the almost perfectly constructed system collapsed because of one gang member who decided to bargain for a hypothetical reduction in his sentence. This prisoner was named Dion Millman, nicknamed Bugsy. He received a life sentence without parole and decided to make a deal with the investigators. Millman told them about an industrial meth production laboratory. After verifying the information, the authorities linked it to Hyperchem Industries, registered in an industrial park in Pleasanton. The DEA then developed an operation codenamed Blue Dragon. The first stage involved surveillance, and the second involved a complete blockade of the industrial park and the arrest of the criminals. However, Chief Chemist Arturo Colano noticed the surveillance and initiated a premeditated retreat plan so that when the authorities activated the second stage of their operation, they found a lab full of meth, chemicals, and equipment, but not a single soul. The consequences for the Aryan Brotherhood's drug business were significant, but not catastrophic. The elimination of Hyperchem Industries temporarily disrupted itself, whose financial and operational structure was diversified, was not decapitated, and eventually resumed its work, albeit on a smaller scale. Another pillar of financial solvency, besides drug dealing, was arms trafficking, mainly in Mexico, where cartels were embroiled in the chaos of constant bloody feuds with each other and the state, which we have discussed in a number of our videos, starting with the Gulf and Los Zetas cartels, to the Knights Templar and the Jalisco New Generation cartels. This ongoing conflict has created a constant demand for weapons. The cartels, which already possessed huge arsenals of small arms, were in dire need of more serious military-grade weapons. The problem was not money. Their funding was virtually unlimited, but the lack of reliable, scalable, and consistent supply channels. It was this vacuum that the Aryan Brotherhood decided to fill. The mastermind behind this operation was Barry the Baron Mills, one of the top leaders of the AB who had spent decades in almost complete isolation. He gave the orders for the members of the Nazi lowriders or other allied gangs to join the army, specifically choosing military specialties related to the Quartermaster Corps, which gave them direct access to weapons depots. These Brotherhood members became suppliers, systematically stealing and smuggling weapons. At the same time, work was carried out on the civilian front. Members and accomplices of the Brotherhood with clean backgrounds or forged documents were hired to work at the giant Hawthorne Army Depot through its operating contractor, Day and Zimmerman. It wasn't difficult to infiltrate a system that employed 14,000 civilians. These internal agents used every opportunity to steal, from small batches carried under their clothes to organizing entire caravans of stolen trucks. The next critical element was a logistics hub for consolidating and transshipping all the stolen goods, which was set up in a large warehouse in San Diego. As soon as the weapons arrived there, the labels on the boxes identifying the contents as weapons were replaced with labels stating that they contained spare parts for agricultural machinery. These boxes were then loaded onto a truck with real spare parts, which were placed closer to the door so that customs officials looking at the first boxes could verify the authenticity of the cargo. The management of this entire flow was digital and precise, as in the best logistics companies in the world. Each disguised box was labeled with a barcode that was scanned during loading. Data on the location of the cargo, its route, and arrival time were entered into a computer database in real time. The entire system allowed the Brotherhood to maintain a continuous flow of supplies, which enabled it to dominate the illegal arms market in Mexico, where most of its competitors were unable to prove such consistency and variety. This in turn generated enormous profits, possibly even greater than those from drug trafficking. Most importantly, it was almost clean money, which went through several stages of laundering before reaching the Brotherhood's accounts. The success of the arms business became not only a source of enormous wealth for the Aryan Brotherhood, but also a catalyst for a fundamental strategic transformation. Realizing the limitations of purely criminal activity, Baron Mills initiated an ambitious new shift, moving the organization into the semi-legal sphere. The practical embodiment of this strategy was the creation of a network of car and motorcycle dealerships. The dealerships had millions of dollars in assets, real estate, land, and expensive new cars in their parking lots. Money from arms deals and drug trafficking was invested in the purchase of these businesses and their inventory. After that, the money passing through the legal bank accounts of the dealership and recorded as revenue from car sales returned to circulation crystal clear. Moreover, each actual sale of a car or motorcycle brought additional, now completely legal, profit. Thus, the Brotherhood not only laundered its money, but also began to earn on its own dirty capital, entering the realm of respectable business. Particular emphasis was placed on Harley-Davidson dealerships. These establishments, where wine receptions were held on Saturdays for wealthy clients, served as the perfect cover. While presentations for lawyers and doctors were taking place in the front, inconspicuous trucks were delivering meth throughout the region from the back door, turning the dealership into a powerful distribution hub. However, implementing this plan required professional expertise from the legal world, which lawyer Chris George was ready to provide. They created a holding company called Phoenix Corporation, registered in Carson City, Nevada, with fictitious employees, except for himself as CEO. Through this holding company, an entire network of car and motorcycle dealerships staffed by members of the Nazi lowriders was brought up within a month. However, this was not enough for Mills. His appetites and strategic vision extended further. Real power lay in owning banks. Thus, the small Three Palms Community Bank, insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, and regulated at the state level in Florida, was purchased. This venture was the culmination of Mills's evolutionary strategy. Owning a bank not only solved the problem of money laundering, it opened up access to unlimited credit, international wire transfers, and the creation of the Aryan Brotherhood's virtually impenetrable financial labyrinth, which still functions today. The year 2002 was a turning point in the history of the Brotherhood. The authorities, finally recognizing the problem, decided to combat it using the RICO Act. The indictment was initiated by Assistant U.S. Attorney Gregory Jessner, who, in his 110-page complaint, named 40 members of the Brotherhood as guilty of 32 murders, more than 100 attempted murders, racketeering, drug trafficking, and extortion. Since many of the defendants were already serving life sentences or close to it, simply adding more years to their sentences did not scare or deter them. The prosecution sought the death penalty, which is what they intended to pursue. To better understand the scale and attention that the authorities paid to this problem, you need to know that a special operation called Arrow was developed to transport prisoners from the prisons where they were being held, to be carried out by 24 U.S. Marshals with automatic weapons. The first targets in this large-scale raid were two of the three top leaders of the Brotherhood, the so-called Commission. Barry the Baron Mills and Tyler the Hulk Bingham were being held at the Pelican Bay prison. The Marshals' assault team first entered Mills's cell. After showing a bit of temper and engaging in a verbal altercation with the Marshals' commander, Barry nevertheless went with them, without physical resistance. However, as soon as the door to Tyler Bingham's cell opened, he jumped on one of the marshals and tried to take his weapon. The marshals shocked him with stun guns and took him to the plane that was to transport prisoners. These scenes, more reminiscent of the arrest of particularly dangerous militants than a routine prison transfer, spoke volumes. The federal authorities viewed these men not simply as convicted criminals, but as high-ranking commanders of a hostile organization whose influence extended far beyond the prison walls. This was only the first act of Operation Arrow. The plane took off heading east, where the next 18 defendants, scattered across maximum security prisons across the country, were waiting. Among them was the third leader of the Brotherhood, Thomas Silverstein. He was serving his sentence in a unique facility, the Hannibal Room, named after Hannibal Lecter's cell in the movie Silence of the Lambs. It was a transparent cell inside an isolated wing of Leavenworth Prison. There was no concept of day or night there, only the eternal, painful light of the lamps. No razors, no scissors, no contact with other people. Only constant surveillance through cameras and food served through a hatch. Here, Terrible Tom spent 15 years painting and watching TV. During his arrest, 4 tasers were aimed at Silverstein while he was being searched for weapons. He was then handcuffed, shackled, and chained, and taken to join the others on the plane. Operation Arrow was a success. The plane landed in Los Angeles, where all the prisoners were distributed among detention centers awaiting trial, which was to be one of the most high-profile trials of a prison gang in U.S. history. The operation itself and the unprecedented security measures that accompanied it sent a clear message. The state was no longer willing to tolerate criminals sentenced to life terms continuing to run businesses from behind bars. The authorities finally recognized the Aryan Brotherhood not as a collection of individual outlaws, but as a criminal organization with its own hierarchy, economy, and ideology. As we said, they decided to combat this threat with the help of the RICO Act. Initially, it was used to fight the mafia, but then it began to be applied in the fight against any organized crime groups. Under this law, it was necessary to prove that the defendant was part of such a gang and participated in its activities by committing 2 or more of the 35 crimes listed in the law over a 10-year period. The main thing was that the punishment under this law was much more severe than if a person were tried for each crime separately. Therefore, attorney Gregory Gessner no longer needed to prove that Mills personally stabbed someone to death in a prison cell. Instead, he could charge him with being the leader of a criminal enterprise who gave the order for the murder, and that the murder was part of the Brotherhood's overall criminal activity. A crime physically committed by a regular gang member in the prison yard legally turned into a crime which the leaders sitting in solitary confinement cells were guilty of. RICO allowed the entire gang to be viewed as a single entity, with its leaders as the brain. However, announcing the intention to apply RICO and successfully doing so in court are 2 different things. First, it was necessary to demonstrate the existence of the Aryan Brotherhood itself as a single organization with its own structure, goals, and continuous illegal activity. The defense would undoubtedly try to portray it as an amorphous group of prisoners rather than an analog of a mafia family. So Gessner and his team began the painstaking work of documenting every aspect of the Brotherhood's life. They studied its history from the Diamond Tooth Gang to the Commission, deciphered its rituals, and recorded its symbols. Next, Gessner had to prove that the dozens of crimes his team had found evidence of were committed by gang members in the interests of the gang to strengthen its power, eliminate enemies, or maintain discipline. If a rank-and-file fighter committed a murder on orders from above, that murder was legally attributed to all the leaders of the organization who gave the order or created the circumstances in which it was inevitable. Gessner planned to do this not only with the evidence he had found, but also with the testimony of defectors from the Brotherhood. Some were afraid of the potential death penalty, some had long been under sentence from the Brotherhood itself, and some had other reasons that outweighed the threat of death for betrayal. Testimony against the leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood was also obtained from a number of former high-ranking members of the organization who had become informants. Kevin Roach, driven by disappointment in his illusory power over the prison world, struck a blow at the very structure, revealing the internal hierarchy of the Commission and its contract killing mechanism. Glenn West's motive was revenge after his expulsion from the Brotherhood. His damage consisted of direct testimony about Wills's orders and his personal confession to murder. The most significant damage was done by Albert "Skinny" Benton, whose only chance of freedom was to cooperate with the investigation. He provided irrefutable evidence by personally confessing to 2 brutal murders on the direct orders of Mills and Bingham. His detailed description of receiving an encrypted message and the subsequent bloody massacre in Leavenworth became a key argument for the prosecution under the RICO Act. The informants also talked about meetings where murders were planned, the system of transmitting orders using coded letters and secret signals, votes on the elimination of traitors, the financing of operations through drug trafficking, and much more. The defendants tried to challenge each episode separately to portray the witness as liars trying to save their own skins and to deny the very structure of the Brotherhood. But the prosecution led by Gessner methodically, day after day, built an irrefutable case before the jury. They demonstrated how an order whispered in a hallway led to an outbreak of violence in a prison on the other side of the country. They proved that a tattoo on an arm was not just a symbol of brotherhood, but a sign of membership in a criminal syndicate. As a result, the leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood, including Mills and Bingham, were found guilty on multiple counts under the RICO Act in 2006. However, the authorities did not achieve their main goal. The jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision on the death penalty, and the court handed down a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Finally, justice had prevailed. The 2 main criminals had been isolated forever. But was it a victory? Prosecutors speaking to reporters tried to show that they had achieved real success. They claimed that they were sending a message about the unacceptability of murders in prisons. However, behind the scenes, they acknowledged failure. Millions of dollars and years of work had been wasted. Barry the Baron Mills should never have been released before the trial. The new life sentence was like whipping a dead horse, a lot of noise but no real effect. For the Hulk Bingham, who could have been eligible for parole in 2010, it was a loss, but again, not the death penalty that the prosecution so desperately wanted. Immediately after the trial, the prosecution filed a motion to completely isolate Mills and Bingham from the outside world, depriving them not only of visits, but also of correspondence and even paper and pencils in their cells. It was a desperate attempt to seal them off. Like a dangerous virus, an admission that the prison administration feared the influence even from the depths of a top-secret bunker. The judge refused and called the proposed conditions unconstitutional. In the end, a compromise was reached. Communication was allowed, but only with a narrow circle of people pre-approved by the prison authorities. The partial restriction was a classic bureaucratic trick. The door remained ajar, and everyone understood that Mills and Bingham's words would still find their way to the intended recipients. For the Department of Justice, their transfer to the most secure prisons was the logical conclusion to the case. The threat had been neutralized, the monsters locked up in the most secure cage. But this logic ignored a fundamental truth. For people like the Baron and the Hulk, prison, even one like this, was never just a cage. It was not a defeat, but merely a change of scenery. Mills and Bingham, imprisoned in their concrete coffins, became symbols. For some, the embodiment of pure evil, and for others, martyrs. The court, as we said, did not eliminate the Aryan Brotherhood, but forced it to evolve. The Brotherhood made a strategically necessary transition from a centralized pyramid of power to a decentralized network structure. What the authorities perceived as decapitation was in fact a forced delegation of authority. Moreover, everything was in place for this. Earlier, we described the Brotherhood's management structure with the commission, councils, and so on. In essence, when the commission could no longer effectively manage the organization, its power was distributed among regional councils or even to the prison level. These local leaders had considerable autonomy in making operational decisions, which made the organization less vulnerable to targeted strikes by the authorities, whereas previously the neutralization of Mills and Bingham could have dealt a blow to the entire structure. Now removing one link from the chain did not mean breaking the chain itself. The Brotherhood had become a hydra, with 2 heads growing in place of each one that was cut off. With the weakening of the Central Command in California, the epicenter of the Aryan Brotherhood's activity shifted to other states. Regional branches in Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, and Florida now enjoy considerable autonomy and are growing in numbers. This is where the organization's main lifeblood is concentrated. The financial infrastructure created by the Brotherhood during its heyday continues to exist. According to investigative authorities, the organization still controls millions of dollars obtained from drug and arms trafficking and has a stake in a Miami bank through a front company called Phoenix Inc. It also continues to control a network of car and motorcycle dealerships. However, at the moment, the Brotherhood is experiencing an identity crisis, so to speak. Decentralization has allowed it to diversify its risks, but it's also widened the ideological gap. In its heyday, the Commission's triumvirate clearly guided the organization along the path of power and money, using the idea of white supremacy as fuel. Now, some of the leaders have lost their way, turning to neo-Nazism and Christian identity as ends in themselves. Because of this, there have been more frequent clashes with other gangs on racial grounds, which sometimes contradict the goals of those members of the Brotherhood, who want more power and money. As a result, at the start of the second decade of the 21st century, the Aryan Brotherhood presents a contradictory picture. On the one hand, it maintains a presence in the prison systems of many states, has an extensive network on the outside, and controls significant financial flows. On the other hand, it's lost its internal unity, strategic purpose, and discipline. An empire built on fear, iron will, and calculation is plunging into chaos generated by changing conditions and its own legacy.